Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Archival Discourses. I am returning guest on this channel, AI Shire Tory, or shall I say now AI Shire Homelander. How are you?
I am great, Hitman. Yes, I have a name change. Don't dead name me, Hitman. um, and I'm glad to be back. And in a funny way, I think i- the last time I was on, or the last few times on, we've talked about Alexander the Great and his conquest against the Achaemenids, and now we're talking about the Iranians again. So there's an interesting theme of my appearances on here. I sort of shuttle back to the Iranian peoples in some way.
Well, in fairness, in between those Alexander streams and this stream, I did have you on to talk about the dire state of the British economy some months ago.
That is true. Yeah, there was a break in that, and yeah, I mean, I am interested today because this is something which you always see articles or people talking about regime change in Iran. Of course, last year there was a unearthed speech by Jonathan Bowden, whose name and legacy is doing around with Ed Dutton's book release, but where he talked about that the next stage, I guess, and this was back in 2010, 2011, I believe, just before his death. He talked about the possibility of regime change in Iran, and he was looking at the trajectory of what was going on in Iraq. Um, Actually, it might have been early. I think it might have been 2006, 2007. That speech that he delivered, but this concept has been around for a long time, and how it would look, and the in the revolution, the monarchy wasn't killed off. They were exiled, and they exist today in the United States, in the West, and are very present, still active, politically active, as we will see.
No, thank you. And yeah, just to give a bit of an introduction as to why I'm wanting to discuss this topic. So, well, as we all know, good, a guy in our circles, academic agent, very, very intelligent guy. As some people know, he's well, of a part Iranian ancestry, and he's always interested in Iranian affairs, and he gets a lot of news from like his father, who's Iranian, and a lot of his relatives. And he was saying some months ago that he's hearing on the ground that there is a real sense that there's going to be a regime change. Um, a lot of it is down to obviously, as we know, Iran is, the hardline enemy of the country of Israel in the Middle East for obvious reasons, and essentially there's a sentiment that on the ground there, all the people have kind of gone over to being like pro-Israel, which sounds very cursed in some aspects, but just to put that in a bit more context, I mean, Iran and Israel did have an alliance during the mid 20th century, so from the creation of Israel up until the revolution in '79, and even during the '80s, there was actually an alliance between Israel and Iran. Obviously, they both have their issues with the Arabs, so that made sense. But especially this continuance of the alliance into the '80s, this was largely because of the Iran-Iraq war. The Israelis actually sent weapons to the Iranian regime, which they deny to this day, but it happened. And there was also very famously the Israelis bombed a Iraqi nuclear facility that was built by the French, so to try and stifle any chance of Saddam Hussein acquiring a nuclear weapon. But that's a whole other topic. But ultimately, there's this idea. So, and what sort of has made me more interested in this idea of regime change is the son of the last Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, or Reza Pahlavi. He's been doing the rounds. So I've been aware of him for years, but in the last 6 months, and especially in the last three since January, he's been on this like whistle stop tour of interviews all around these various sort of Western pundits and various sort of media shows, and saying that the regime is going to fall, and you've got to back me as a democratic transition leader. And just very interesting that, him being the crown prince, the son of the last Shah, why is he not saying, install me as the new Shah? Because there is an Iranian monarchist movement, but they're not as big as some people would make them out to be. But what's most interesting of all these different interviews he's done, he actually did do one I noticed with Maya Artusi, which is I'm not going to make us put up with that because it's probably going to be very, very cursed. But the main one I want us to look at is he did one last month with the Telegraph, which they released a couple of days ago. It's almost an hour long, but it's very interesting. We're going to watch and comment on this interview, and because unfortunately, from what I knew of the Crown Prince, I was always somewhat sympathetic to him, believing, he's just trying to restore, his lost kingdom fundamentally, and I can sympathise with that. But listening to this interview, I've come to realise that he's a truly repulsive character, and we will get onto that through this interview. But just a comment in the chat. Shrived Goji, hello y'all. If I may ask, what was the US role in the fall of the House of Pahlavi? It seems that they had some role. Do you think the IR of Iran is something that's biting the US back? That is interesting. I could see why the US would see the Shah as a bit of a liability. I mean, it's important to remember that Jimmy Carter did attempt to try and establish some dialogue with the Ayatollah, especially during the Iranian hostage crisis. So, so I think that is true to some angle. What do you think of that, AI?
It is quite interesting because when I was at school, we had this Iranian chap who fled just after the I think it was during or just after the revolution. Around that time, he was quite an older chap, and he opened up a small cafe. I mean, I did get we got my dad and him got chatting about because they were both sort of that generation where they were remembered the revolution. And what was quite interesting, and I remember this to this day, he was saying that it was that a lot of the Americans believed that there was going to be during the revolution, and like previous revolutions, and like the Bolshevik, like the Russian Revolution and the French Revolution, it was many different factions going onto the street together. You had, of course, the Islamists, but you also had the socialists, the communists, liberals, and various other people vying for political influence and power during this thing. And you could see they all united with the negative vision of the net negative vision of just bringing down the Shah and bringing down the Shah's regime, which is what happened. Of course, though, in the aftermath of the collapse of the government, it was the mullahs and the Ayatollah were the most organized group on the ground, and they were able to seize power. And I mean, the liberals were just not serious about anything, so they didn't count. But of course, there were battles on the street with communists and socialists. So and what's really funny is a lot of people in the West within governments believe that during the protests, during the early starts of the revolution, that it was more likely that there would be a communist regime installed, or there'd be a communist. Not many people really viewed the mullahs as a legitimate force that could seize power in the revolution, and I think that's just. I think that there wasn't enough understanding of how influential the clerics were, especially in rural Iran and small towns, and also So it is quite an interesting. That is a quite interesting thing. I think maybe American ignorance and maybe lack of understanding of the region played a part of it.
Possibly. I mean, it's important to note that the mullahs, or the Iranian clerical class, had been established in Iran since ever the Islamic conquest, but in particular, after you have the creation of the Safavid Iran by Shah Ismail I, who establishes Shia Islam as a state religion, and he imports many sort of Lebanese clerics, Shia clerics from the Levant into Iran to help with these forced conversions. And obviously their descendants are still there to this day, and so you have this sort of entrenched clerical class that was always very important for the power of the modern Iranian monarchy since the conversion to Shia Islam. So they were always a factor. But just commenting on this prospect of the communists, I mean, that's very real because Caravaggio's mentioned Operation Ajax in the chat. Yes, the 1953 coup. One of the reasons that happened is because at the time you had Iran's Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. He was actually working with the Tudeh party, which was the party of the masses, the Communist Party. They were propping him up, and so one of the reasons the Americans agreed under Eisenhower to support that coup was because they feared there was going to be a genuine communist takeover in Iran. But what's also interesting is later on you have the PEK, or the People's Mujahideen of Iran. They obviously were purged during the revolution, and something that's really quite shocking, AI, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the PEK had support amongst many Western conservatives, including several Tory MPs, including my former Tory MP, funnily enough. So, yes, literally the Tory case for communist revolution, everyone.
It doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me, and I like to. Well, that would be an interesting subject to see how that connection works. But how they can square that away. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me. Um,
No, and just to go on this broader point, so another reason why I wanted to do this stream and look at this idea of regime change in Iran is that, as you mentioned, you think, this is idea that the Americans didn't really understand the country. Well, here's my view. To me, regime change does seem relatively plausible. I'm not saying it's guaranteed. I mean, I believe one possible catalyst would be the death of Ayatollah Khomeini. I mean, he's pretty old. He's in his 70s. He can't have that much longer to live, frankly. And his death, I think, would be probably a most likely catalyst for regime change there. What could possibly happen is because something AA said his dad's lined out is there's a possible chance that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, who've been increasing their power in the country, they could possibly just take over once Khomeini's dead. And then perhaps you could see maybe like a power struggle between the mullahs and the IRGC. And then from there, maybe you could get regime change, perhaps some sort of colour revolution. And if not, a civil war if things went really badly. But,
yeah, I was watching on just quickly here before we'll start this shortly, but I was watching on Al Jazeera. It was about a year old news piece, but it was basically showing like the discontent, especially in cities like urban cities like Tehran and such, and in Iran, and these various trends where you have people filming kicking clerics and knocking their hats off, and just sort of certain levels of violence. Um, and you also have like the increasing hostility towards the sort of Islamic police and the revolutionary guards who go around every now and then to assist in these sorts of duties. And it does sort of one thing that they did mention in there was the role of the army, how you have a lot of like people in the army who are nationalists, who um, you know, are not entirely on the side of um, the the religious policing side of it, or the clerical side of it, but they're there. They want the Iran to have that influence, and that exists in, say, Iraq, and also at the time over Syria. So there is like this you know within the system, within the regime in Iran, you have various different interests. And I do wonder that if, as you said, when the Ayatollah dies, that you have like these parallel, this sort of parallel society where you have the army who want to go in one direction, and then you have who are in complete opposite with the Revolutionary Guard, who want to maintain the status quo. And that would, I mean, that would naturally lead to some sort that I think would lead to a regime change, and that's what they were sort of alluding to, that the army would be the key in Iran to that sort of regime change.
And another comment from Shrived Goji. It'd be most interesting if y'all were to host a discussion on the political philosophy of the Ayatollah government and the Pahlavi before them. Thank you for the great answer. Well, very glad you brought that up, Shrived Goji, because where I was getting to with all the spiel is that as we know, I do many streams on the channel in the Middle East, but my next major series I'm going to do is on the history of modern Iran, starting with obviously Shah Ismail being declared Shah in 1501, and then going up until the modern day, at the very least until the death of Khomeini in 1989, but possibly might go a bit later. And going to be joined by my friend Hunger for that series. And the very first episode is going to be dropping this Saturday. We're going to be doing an introductory episode on pre-modern Iran, so the Cyrus the Great until the At-Khalanyu, so almost 2,000 years of Iranian history. So, and very much going to be looking at a lot of the philosophical and ideological underpinnings and broad cultural elements of modern Iran. And so, yes, we'll definitely get to the political philosophy of the Ayatollah Shrived Goji. And ultimately, one of the reasons I'm doing this series is because I feel that in our circles, in our sphere and in the West, I feel there seems to be this sentiment of that the Iranian regime is so bad that they deserve to be overthrown, and that it's a net benefit. And I'm just going to say that I think that's a much more complex question than that personally. I don't really see it as a net good overall. I mean, I see it more as, well, who benefits? Does the Iranian people benefit? Or does the West benefit? And I think in a potential regime change, I think the West would certainly benefit, but I don't think necessarily Iran would benefit. So ultimately, that's one of the reasons I want to do this series. I just want to try and better educate people as to understanding Iran, because I feel that when a lot of people look at the Islamic Republic, they see it as some sort of like historical aberration. What, Iran and Islamic Republic? Who'd have thunk it? This is mental. And it's like, well, no, it's not mental. And I hope my series is going to properly educate and help people understand that, no, it's not illogical. In fact, there's almost a perfect logical sense behind why that regime exists in Iran today.
What was it? The Adam Curtis documentary. You had the Iranian liberal who said that you had these lumpens who came out from the countryside and killed off the cream of society.
Indeed. Right. Well, without further ado, let's get into this interview. So, right. Okay.
The Iranian people are there not just to save themselves. They're sending a message to the world that we are your solution. Why are you not on the right side of history?
So already you can see he's out with the boomer truthisms.
Yeah, like it's we need to be on the right side of history of this, guys. This is how many times in the last 5 years we've heard, I mean, from the very earliest time, or 10 years probably now, of like feminists, race, black nationalist types. Like how many different people have coined that term? I mean, it's so, in many ways, when I first listened, when you sent this to me, Hitman, I did have to like pause, because I honestly, I did not know much about the Crown Prince, what sort of person he was. I knew the circles he swam, but I thought maybe it was just for alliance building sake. But this wasn't a very like first good impressions. I will be honest.
No, as we'll get through, we'll see what utter cringe he spouts. So.
I need to be able to tell them I'm trying my best to make sure that the world this time doesn't abandon you and stands with you, as opposed to an obstacle to your liberation.
I'm Roland Oliphant, and this is Battle Lines. On this bonus episode of Battle Lines, I speak to Reza Pahlavi, the son of Mohammad Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran, who was overthrown in 1979. The Crown Prince has lived in exile ever since, but he now believes the regime could be heading to collapse and is positioning himself as the potential figurehead of a democratic transition. I asked him why he thinks Iran is headed for a revolution like the one that overthrew his father, why he believes he could lead such a change, and what he thinks Western governments should do at this moment in Iranian history. Reza Pahlavi, welcome to Battle Lines. We're very pleased to have you on Battle Lines, partly because it feels like Iran is at a critical moment. It feels like a lot of people are saying to us, including people we speak to inside Iran, that the regime feels more fragile than it has for many, many years, possibly since the revolution. And therefore, your role as a spokesman, I suppose, for anti-regime opposition groups outside is fascinating. But before we get into that, I wanted to talk about you, because not many people are royalty in exile. Could you just tell us a bit about your life? What's it like being Reza Pahlavi?
Well, the way you pose the question is clear that, from the day I was born to the point of being groomed to one day as the crown prince, filling my father's shoes, at least that was the path. I come out of Iran right after I graduate from high school. I go to the undergraduate pilot training program in Reza Air Force Base after having had some flying experience back in Iran. And in the midst of all this, the revolution happens. My parents leave the country. It's a complete sea change. And all of a sudden, you live in a new reality. And what does that do to me? It puts me in a situation where shortly after my father passed away in Cairo and the war breaks out between Iran and Iraq, and my first intervention regarding Iran post-revolution was, I'm willing to join our Air Force to fight against the invading enemy, was my first reaction. And
yeah, just to give some more context, so those who don't know that in 1980, the year after the revolution, Saddam Hussein invades Iran and begins the almost decade-long Iran-Iraq war. Drags on until 1988. It's sometimes called World War I of the Middle East because despite some very quick, rapid movements, it then bogs down into almost like trench warfare, where the Iranians counterattack and almost push Saddam's forces back into Iraq, and the obviously the West, including most importantly the Reagan's administration, sends loads of support to Saddam to try and prevent him from just collapsing, because ultimately with the revolution, it's not just a revolution in Iran. The Ayatollah and the mullahs almost want a Shiite revolution across the Middle East, and obviously Iraq is majority Shia. There's many important Shia holy sites there in the country, and obviously Saddam's regime, they are Sunni and not Shia, although their Baathists are secular.
Yeah, and in many ways, the war it is quite interesting. He mentioned that I'm guessing from what I'm understanding, his initial reaction was he wants to return to his homeland to help defend Iran from Saddam's forces. Is that what he was sort of getting at there?
Yes, yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Which is interesting. The throughout this whole interview, he does he understands that he does understand his criticism is, listen, you're in like the den of the enemies of the Iranian people at the moment, or the Iranian government at the moment. And so he has to sort of play this sort of fine line of, yeah, if Iraq, when Iraq was invading, I wanted to join, which would be ironic given the fact that he would have joined like the revolutionary army in some capacity. So that's an
Interesting.
interesting statement.
just got a comment from Total Yankee Defenestration. The narrative of Iran's coming revolution, like Putler's imminent downfall and China's collapsing economy, is the mere puffery of wiggery and zoggery and nothing more. I mean, I'm somewhat sympathetic to nothing ever happens, but of the three, I think a regime change in Iran is significantly more likely than the fall of Putin or the collapse of China. Personally, and just from what I've seen and heard, I mean, 6 months ago I would have dismissed it, but from what I'm hearing from these credible sources like AA's own sort of family connections, and what we're just seeing, why are we suddenly getting the crown prince being splattered all over the news and doing all of these interviews? Like, he's been around for quite a while. Why suddenly are they doing this? So I think there is a good degree of priming going on here. So
there is priming. I mean, there's if you look back at articles, you've got articles from you got the Financial Times, you've got in America The Hill, you've got all these various like proper regime outlet, the most regime of regime outlets who are now saying it's time for regime change in Iran. The mullahs must go, such and such. I do understand Total Yankee Defenestration's comment there, but because of course a couple years ago we had this this again, and this was over like some sort of schoolgirl protest or something to do with schoolgirls protesting. Now let's be honest, Hitman, schoolgirls were not going to bring down the Islamic Republic of Iran.
no.
So I can understand why people are skeptical of this, but I do think when you have like the Crown Prince in exile who is doing more media rounds. This isn't the only one. He's been doing for the last week and a bit now. He's been doing quite a few rounds, and also the fact that Iran has lost their guy in Syria, and the Alawites are, or at the moment in Syria, are absolutely getting decimated. It isn't looking good, and also mention Hamas and Hezbollah. Israel's come out quite strong. I mean, that's not not endorsement. That's just looking at it on as it is. I think Iran's had a few L's in the last year.
That's precisely. And so my point is, they're looking more vulnerable than they are. Again, with the fall of Assad's regime in Syria. Obviously, you've had we mustn't forget with Lebanon, though Israel's invasion was largely unsuccessful. One success of Israel is they were able to completely wipe out the leadership of Hezbollah with that pager incident. And the Hezbollah are essentially the Lebanese wing of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard ultimately, and so that was a massive L for them as well. And just a comment. So Michael Hasler. So what would be the new regime of Iran, an absolutist monarchy or an aristocratic republic? What I think ultimately is it's going to be some form of quote unquote democracy, quote unquote. Just question: is it going to be a constitutional parliamentary monarchy like the UK with Reza Shah as this sort of symbolic constitutional monarch, but no real actual power, or we're going to see some kind of the Democratic Republic with maybe him as like a figurehead president or something? That's ultimately what I think is most likely to happen. But stranger things have happened.
Where he's going to come out on the balcony, his new presidential palace, and go, Iran is just a set of ideas. It's a set of values, and these values are democratic and openness and fairness.
And sodomy.
And so yeah, watch out, Afghanis. There's a new sheriff in town. Sorry, continue, Hitman.
My dedication to the cause of Iran's liberation started right then. So for the past 44 years and counting, my entire life has been dedicated to that cause. So it never occurred to me to fall into the mindset of, lamenting being exiled, but more what is first and foremost a patriotic duty not because of expectation, but because of voluntary obligation that has guided my long journey of fighting for that liberation from day one. And I think, 44 years later, we are now, as you put it, at a point that not only the regime is at its most vulnerable and weakest state, but at the same time, never has our nation been more ready for that change. So I think right now we are talking about a very critical window that has opened with the historical opportunity to change the direction of history as a result of the kind of change we hope finally we are able to achieve in Iran, which is really a liberation of the people from the yoke of an extremely repressive dictatorial regime, and ultimately achieve what is the only salvation and path to Iran's future, which is a secular democratic alternative to the current religious dictatorship. That has been my mission in life.
And you've been very clear about that. I really want to get into the details in this moment. A couple more questions about you.
Yeah, so just to jump off some of these other points. So again, they sort of primed us with this idea that, Iran is not democratic. And I mean, well, they have elections, they have a parliament, they elect their president, they elect members to the parliament, and they legislate. And okay, there's definitely some question marks over how they run their elections. Certainly, there is evidence that there have been certain fortification that have taken place, and there's even an argument that the president isn't really sovereign, and it's really the supreme leader, and there's all this just the Iranian deep state looms over the elected government. And okay, but I mean, on some level, how's that any different to any Western country we live under today? I mean, we've seen fortification, we know that there's a deep state, so it's just that where we do it, it's democracy, but in Iran, it's dictatorship. And this idea that Iran's future is this sort of secular democratic direction is very interesting, because when we're looking at this idea that the Islamic Republic is somehow illegitimate and that we've got to take it in this more secular direction, well, ultimately taking the country in a more secular direction was one of the reasons you had the downfall of the monarchy to begin with, because you had the country modernizing under this sort of almost like absolutist and royal dictatorship, as it were. But the Shah pretty much sidelined the mullahs and sidelined the Islamic culture of Iran, because it's very interesting, because the actual name of the dynasty Pahlavi, that is a reference to the original Old Persian script of Iran before the Islamic conquest, which again, very symbolic note there. But it's also worth commenting on is that Reza Shah Pahlavi, the founder of that dynasty, who became Shah in 1925, he also didn't even want to become Shah originally. He actually wanted to turn Iran into a Kemalist style secular republic like Ataturk's Turkey, and it's only because of the power and influence of the clergy in Iran that he wasn't able to do that, and had to come to some accommodation with them by saying, "Okay, we'll support you, but you have to adopt the Shah and protect the Islamic faith," and that's what happened there. And then with this further sidelining of the faith, because under his son Mohammad Reza, you seem to get this almost like Persian Empire LARPing, where Fassad says, he does all this propaganda showing off the various old Achaemenid kings. In 1971, Mohammad Reza Shah hosts this almost decadent celebration of the 2500th anniversary of the Persian Empire. Like, he holds this like banquet at Persepolis, and he invites dignitaries from all over the world, and he has Maxims of Paris like run the catering, and it's an absorbent it's like billions of pounds are spent on this like decadent display, and it just didn't go down well with the public, because it was seen as an inordinate expense. And again, it's all just a bit of a LARP. And again, another thing Mohammad Reza does is that he gets rid of Iran's Islamic calendar, and instead creates a new calendar based starting time with the founding of the Persian Empire. I mean, okay, that's all well and good, but the thing is, you're disrupting the culture and mores that Iranians have lived under for centuries, because the Islamic calendar, okay, you may not like it, but ultimately that's what everybody uses. It's like during the French Revolution when they got rid of the Gregorian calendar and replaced it with the French Revolutionary calendar. You just completely confused everybody by unnecessarily changing things.
Yeah, it is like it is unnecessary, and also, I mean, that is the key point. The country itself wasn't in a good position for him to have this sort of host these sorts of events. And to be honest, on the surface, it sounds pretty cool, that the fact that, and it's not exactly wrong, that connecting the ancient past to your present and now, and going from the pre-Islamic Iran to the modern Islamic Iran and everything, and this is where it comes down to, and this is what comes down to the crux of it, is that Islam, it is in its essence, in its origin, it isn't like it's an ethno religion for the Arabs, and you got the Arab civilization and the Persian Iranian civilization, and because the Sassanid Empire was conquered by the caliphates, you have like this, and over time the emergence of the Islamic rulers in the remnants of the Sassanid empire, and these Persian Iranian speaking rulers that had to operate with it as these sort of Islamic rulers, even though that a good portion of populations were still Zoroastrians. So it is this. I do understand this sort of conflict within many Iranians, and that's why you have even today you have some. I'm aware of like the Iranian nationalist type who, and it may be a LARP, but it's where they are full on Zoroastrians, but they are mega Iranian nationalists. And the trouble is, it's not really a lot, because Zoroastrian does still exist in some, around the world, and in certain places in Iran. Though I don't know how it is now. It's whether it's limited or something. But I know I find like the odd documentary on them, like still certain practices and holidays existing.
Well, the thing is, there's hardly any Zoroastrians left. I mean, the largest community of them are the Parsis, which are in India, in Bombay. And the thing is, this is ultimately, going back to, I mentioned Shah Ismail earlier. Well, why did Shah Ismail make the state religion of his empire Shia Islam? And that was to deliberately distinguish Iran from the Ottoman Empire and the wider Islamic world. He wanted to give this new empire, this nation, a distinctive religious identity, and also it was something which, because there's many similarities actually between elements of Shia Islam and Zoroastrianism, because they both have a strong focus on this idea of conquering evil and martyrdom and sacrifice, and they're both very messianic. So if anything, you could almost say that Shia Islam we recontextualized as a somewhat indirect continuation of Zoroastrianism.
Yeah, and also, I mean, what was it, the Tabastan region, so that's like the Caspian Sea region of Iran. For most of its history, you had the what was it, the Bavand dynasty, which was originally their origin dates back to the Sassanid Empire, and they were a Zoroastrian dynasty, but they went through.
Hello, AI. Oh dear, I think we've lost AI. Right, well, we'll keep playing this and hopefully we'll come back soon.
Hello.
I'm wondering.
Oh, hello.
Oh, sorry, my screen went black there. I don't know what happened. That might be my computer. It's okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So I was just saying on the final point. You even had yeah, as you said, these some even dynasties up in certain areas of Iran who existed could trace their roots from the Sassanid times all the way to the 14th, 15th century, as this long continuous though, as you said, like the Bavant dynasty ultimately ended up as adopting 12 Shia Islam, like uh, the rest of the Iranian people.
Oh no, thank you.
You were basically, as you said, you were groomed to be a king. Essentially, that's what you understood you were going to be. When the revolution happened, you must have thought about this a lot, I suppose, over the years. I mean, did it come as a shock? Did you have any sense of what was about to happen?
I don't think a lot of people did, including the revolutionaries. The interesting thing is that as there were obviously clear line of demarcations back then, oddly enough today, there's a path to convergence, because as a result of these 44 years, I think the nation as a whole has come to the conclusion that it is possible to find areas of being like-minded for the best interests of the nation in the future, rather than being stuck with our past. Although a lot of lessons can be drawn from the past, mostly not to repeat the same mistakes again. And I think that's a learning curve. It is a sign of a society that matures as a result. It is the fact that the reason why secularism in Iran is now an understood principle is because we had to experiment and live under a clerical dictatorship to appreciate the importance of secular values and the importance of separation from church and state, as the saying goes, as a prerequisite to democracy, as a means to not allow for any single ideology, whether it's Marxism or Islamic ideology, to be the singular dominating ideology at the expense of discrimination and repression of other people who are not like-minded. That's the whole net result of our journey as Iranians in recent history that puts us now on a path of clear vision of, we know what we don't want, but it's also important to understand what we want. And not only that, but how can we get there? Which is exactly why the campaign that I'm leading today for transition to the next democracy is critical, to see how we're going to navigate these various phases in which we are now until the regime collapses, and then what happens after that during the transition.
I mean, this idea, we can't have these totalizing ideologies like Marxism or Islamism. But I mean, as it's been talked about elsewhere, AI, secularism, liberal democracy, that in itself is a totalizing ideology. It can't brook any rivals. So again, that's a blatant contradiction. This idea that we've not tried real secularism. Yes, you did. Like, your dynasty implemented it essentially. Under your grandfather and your father, like, they were both largely secular regimes, fundamentally. So don't give us this tosh.
Yeah, I mean, Afghanistan tried it at one point. Neighboring Iraq tried it, and Egypt, and the reaction from it was, by many at the was that this was Western and particularly American influence, which of values, which was corrupting decent Muslim people. That was what that was like. Zahari and his followers in Egypt, that was their understanding of it, and that was also the mullahs came, and Ayatollah Khomeini came to that conclusion as well. And just to sort of further a point on here, you are right in the sense of the world that he wants to impose, or the lifestyle he wants to impose on the Iranian people, is really why I mean, if you look at the West now, it is what it is today, and where there is no familiarity. There is no sense of people. Everything is up for sale. Everything is an open, free market, and that sort of promise may have washed, may have washed with like the people. I some time ago, but the thing is, I just don't see it. I think that sort of world that he wants to import into Iran just doesn't. It just isn't there, and I think he's having this sort of fantasy idea of what the West is, and that this utopian society he could build in Iran, and it's just it will create more resentment because as you said before we went live, to follow through logically, Iran, if he was to take over, Iran would be open to foreign markets and foreign investors and foreign wealthy figures to purchase up land, property. You would then have also from the world's global hegemon, certain NGO networks which haven't been abolished under Trump and co to come in. You also have the alliances that he built beforehand with Israel and so stuff. So there will be all these different competing factors, and the Iranian people will be left atomized and resentful. And and so whether or not it be the clerics who would be fighting back against that, or it'd be more nationalist types, I don't know. But the world that he's promising is just this. It's not real, and nobody. I don't think anybody really wants it.
I'm going to actually disagree with you because from what I've heard on the ground and what I've seen, a lot of Iranians are fundamentally becoming increasingly secular and, dare I say, liberal. They're in some ways they're not really that different from your average Western normie, and so the real black pill is that I think they would embrace this and they would love it. And they would love, their nation being, deracinated, exploited, and trashed fundamentally, as long as they can, they can get drunk without being arrested or whatnot, or party away, and they're happy just to dance on the ashes of their civilization.
Speak very confidently of the inevitability of regime collapse. Let's dig into the immediate nitty-gritty of what's happening now. So, as we understand, Iran is in a very difficult economic situation. The currency has fallen even since President Pezeshkian came in, and it suffered traumatic military setbacks abroad with the loss of Bashar Assad and the battering that Hezbollah and Hamas have taken, and so on. Amid all this, Donald Trump has shown up, has returned to his maximum pressure policy, and there seems to be a debate in Iran about whether to talk to the Americans or not, about whether or not to get rid of the nuclear program. Let's start with the current status of that debate. This week, Ayatollah Khamenei essentially said there shouldn't be any talks. He said there can be no negotiations with such a government. The Americans didn't uphold their end of the last deal. The very person who's in office today tore up the agreement. That's Donald Trump. This is an experience we must learn from. We negotiated, we gave concessions, we compromised. We didn't get the results we aimed for, and so on. So essentially, the Supreme Leader seems to have said, no, we're not going to talk, despite this suggestion. I'm interested in why you think he's saying that.
Save £70 on the VAX Spot Wash Home Pet Design. Perfect for cleaning spills and stains in your home. With tools designed to tackle dirt.
And do you think there's an element of bluster at the surface and perhaps talks happening behind the scenes?
Essentially, I think Khamenei is caught in a bind because on the one hand, if he caves into that pressure of engagement, he loses his core base of support, as if he was compromising the inherently anti-Western, hostile to America, hostile to Israel narrative that the regime has pretty much introduced itself to the world since. All of a sudden, that shift would mean that not only he gains much by it, but he loses more of his core support. And he also knows that by caving in, it's the beginning of the downfall. And so it's the last attempt of resisting and buying time to see what else could occur in the meantime. may be enough to regroup and as a result of what you rightfully pointed, that the decimation of both Hamas and Hezbollah, and of course the loss of a critical ally, being Bashar Assad in Syria, makes him even more isolated than ever before. And maybe that one of the calculations from whether it's the Trump administration or others is that under the circumstances, perhaps that's one way that they might finally say, okay, we really don't have any choice but to engage. But we see the double language, which one are you going to believe? Are you going to believe what Javad Zarif says in Davos, or are you going to believe what Khamenei says that, that's not at all? So if anything, net, Khamenei seems to be giving what Trump is hoping for, to say to the world, wait a second, I still gave them a chance. They are the ones rejecting this. Therefore, let's move on to the next phase. It seems to be the current positioning. But I think we need to think a little bit beyond that, because irrespective of what you invoked here, focusing too much on the tree at the expense of forgetting about the forest is also another thing I'd like to attract your attention to.
Go on.
By that, I mean that if we isolate the whole problem to be the nuclear issue, we forget about the other aspects of the regime's impact on regional instability, maintaining the proxy pressure, the narrative of financing radical elements that promote anti-Semitism here and there, or intimidates journalists here and there, or everything else that they've been behind. What about those aspects?
Yes, and so just to jump off from that point, so the one thing I found really interesting is his stance on Trump. So you can see here, no TDS. He's actually seems to be quite supportive of Trump's stance on Iran. So, and as much as we may like or be sympathetic to Trump on this channel and other friends in the circle, unfortunately, if there's going to be regime change in Iran, it's going to happen under Trump or possibly a President Vance or another Republican presidency, unfortunately, and that's just the reality, because in this sort of network, obviously, you mentioned there anti-Semitism. Well, why do you care so much about anti-Semitism in a country that's got hardly any Jews, Reza Pahlavi? And it's because you've been buddying up with a certain Mr. Netanyahu, haven't you?
I mean, I can almost hear it now, that when when the war or the confrontation happens, the casus belli is going to be, well, we're doing it to obviously liberate the Iranian people, to stand up against anti-Semitism and everything. And it's just like, I mean, it's just nonsense, going to this idea of engaging in some conflict on a set of ideas. Be honest, just say, I am the rightful ruler. It's in my bloodline. It's in my, I have divine mandate from Allah or something. God knows what, and just do it like that, for God's sake. I mean, it's just this Weasley mouth, deceptive terms. It's just I'm sick of it.
Yeah, as Semigog likes to say of certain people, the slobbering fool, these people who just slaver and say these disgusting insinuations with their words. And you're right, it's going to be a restoration, but it's going to be the most gay restoration we've ever seen. And just to address some more comments, so Shreve Goji, why do you think Islamdom is still a mighty while Christendom seems to be dead or, God willing, sleeping force? Do you think Christendom was wrecked while Islam wasn't? And is Iran heading here? Well, fundamentally, I think Islam has certainly been a bit more resistant to these forces of secularization. However, unfortunately, I do think it's coming for them as well, unfortunately, just due to the influence of the West, and that's the direction I think it's certainly going in. Well, another way of looking at it is maybe not so much Islam's waning, but in the struggle between the Sunni and Shia, the Sunnis certainly seem to be winning at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, this is my sort of view on this, and you might disagree, but as I sort of stated back, Sunni Islam is, for all intents and purposes, it is a sort of Arab. It's sort of like a natural Arab religion. And as we stated, Shia Islam has become, for all intents and purposes, an ethno-religion for the Iranian people. And that's that is your dividing line. I mean, yes, you do have Shia Arabs and in Iraq and Syria, but the center of Shia Islam is in Iran, and it's among the Iranian people. With Christian, and so it can easily be tied into nationalism. And if you look at propaganda during the Iraq-Iran war, there was that flirtation. Both the the Baathists, who were nominally secular, did flirt with that sort of the religiosity of it, and vice versa. The Islamic Republic also invoked such such things. I think with Christianity, it's I would sort of agree with maybe like someone Bowden when he explained it as like this superstructure for European peoples. And this is why I don't buy into Christian nationalism. I do think, and if you take, say, the UK, for example, in Ireland, the reason why Catholicism and Protestantism uh, persisted more than, say, in England, Wales, and Scotland, where, of course, there is Christianity has decreased, and you have a high sort of atheistic and agnostic population. In Northern Ireland, it's because of the two communities, the two different ethnic communities, and the conflict that coexists there keeps it alive. Same in the Balkans with the close proximity of the Turks, and the history there is what keeps it alive among, say, the Serbs and so on. So that's how I sort of view it. But
Mm. No, certainly that is that's an interesting dimension. Another comment from Michael has there. Is there any other Iran counter elites besides from liberal Democrats, such as an absolutist monarchy, right wing socialist, or even anything right wing? Unfortunately, not. No. The closest you really have to a quote unquote a right wing elite in Iran is really the mullahs and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, and that's it, pretty much.
yeah,
If-
there's no. I mean the sort of communist left back in the day was entirely supported by the Soviet Union in the revolutionary era. I mean, so yeah, and also, as we discovered, Tory MPs as well. So, but yeah, I mean, there's I know there are accounts. There are several like nationalist accounts who like to talk about how the military is its own power block, and I mean, it is possible, but there's no coalescing leadership around the military who are separate from the clerics and separate from the Revolutionary Guard thus yet. Doesn't mean there can't be in the future, but there's no you know, I'm I haven't seen anything sort of talking about in regimes. And one thing I will say is that when you look at the establishment outlets talking about regime change, they always go back to like the bottom up, the schoolgirl protests or the student protests, and you can sort of disregard all those because that's not going to change a thing. I mean, okay, it shows people are angry, but it doesn't show really who are the power brokers in
No, and we had some more comments. Is it SMA Monster? Does anyone realize how stupid this prince is? Well, again, I don't think he's stupid. I think he genuinely believes in like democracy and liberalism, and he sees it. He is not too dissimilar to Prince Charles. I mean, why is our monarchy so cucked and pathetic? AI, it's because they've got this vision of staying monarch and you're not being overthrown. And so what they have to do to make sure they're not overthrown, well, they have to pathetically cuck and do this performative role they've been given. And that's what ultimately Reza Pahlavi wants. He just wants to be restored, but it'll be this performance monarchy and nothing more. It's all a mama's farce. And so again, that's why I think he's truly a repulsive individual.
well, yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, Shrewd Goji, he's fairly dumb. I strongly Muslims his line of reasoning. I pray he would. I pray he would enhance his God-given right instead of kowtowing to mighty Western liberalism. Yes, I'd have more respect for him if he actually made a sincere claim. Yes, I want to be restored as the Shah Hansa, the King of Kings. I want to drive the evil Araman from this world in the Islamic Republic. But no, it's just gay bullshit, really. Sorry, damn, I was going to say something else, but my mind's gone. Well, let's carry on. I might remember it.
And the fact that at the end of the day, the ultimate solution to the problem would be what role a different Iran can play, if indeed the hope is to create an element of stability in the region, as opposed to gearing up for potential conflicts and escalation of that. And for that reason, I think that Western diplomacy, particularly in Europe, has been behind the curve in understanding that, and that's something I've been arguing for all these times, that the initial premise of expectational behavior change was wrong from the get-go, in the sense that it's a lack of recognition of the DNA of this regime, or why it is that it cannot, on the basis of compromise, coexist with the world as we know it. And it's essentially because they are completely opposed to the values that exist in the free world of human rights, of democracy, of fighting any kind of discrimination. And
many groans.
Sorry,
I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna. You can claim, even though it'd be total BS, but you could claim an unbroken lineage to ancient Persia, and then all of your concerns is a piece of document made up by a bunch of Barrack Room lawyers in 1948. What the? Sorry, I'm not going to swear on your channel, Hitman, but this guy is such a disappointment. Such a disappointing person. If I was Iranian and I was like an uber monarchist, I would be I would be seething at this, because this is just not bollocks, absolute bollocks.
The thing is, we talk about the idea of being an idiot. Well, the real idiot are Iranian monarchists who genuinely believe that replacing the Islamic Republic with him is going to be an improvement. No, he's a prostitute. He's going to sell the country out.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing there is he's not even hiding it. Like in this, what is it, the Telegraph? He's not even hiding it. He is just saying, "Yeah, I'm gonna, I'm just going to, I'm going to come in. I'm going to break up society, and then I'm going to sell it to me and my international friends. And this is great because it's going to be human rights. Everyone's going to be an individual, and everyone's going to be free, and we're going to have these self-correcting mechanisms to keep our country together. It's going to be great, guys."
I wonder if, like, the first clause in the new Iranian constitution is going to be anti-Semitism is forbidden. It's a national offence.
yeah. Well, there's going to be like Nuremberg, or the Tehran style trials. You're going to have I don't know, or something.
Demullification, perhaps.
Demullification probably be a better one, yeah.
And sorry, the point I wanted to raise before is, I'm reminded of a stream Apostolic Majesty did about 2 years ago on the uncrowned King of France, Henri of the House of Bourbon. If he'd been crowned, he would have been Henri V. He was the grandson of Charles X, the last Bourbon King of France. And after the deposition of the Second French Empire, and you had the Third Republic, there was a brief moment where he possibly could have been restored as king, and you would have had a restored Kingdom of France. And essentially, it didn't happen because he was not prepared to come back to France unless he could set the terms. Well, no, I don't see. I'm only going to come back if it's going to be a proper traditional monarchy, and we're not going to have that bloody tricolour. Anything else, I don't agree. and he said, as if we're forced to compromise, I'll come in and then I'll probably just be removed in like a month or two. So I don't see the point. I don't see the point of this like farce if we're not going to do it properly. And you know, I kind of respect that.
Yeah, true.
Where the regime stands is the total opposite of where Iranians stand. And rather than investing on the people as the agent of change, we've been focused on trying to force them to change their behaviors, either by sometimes the stick or sometimes through appeasement, but we haven't obtained any result, have we? And continuing on the same path and repeating.
Again, with the boomer truthisms, appeasement, we cannot appease them. And there was actually another interview he gave with some German guy I watched yesterday. And because, as we know, there was this Munich security conference recently where it was mostly about Ukraine, but he actually was invited to that, and the German government rescinded his invite because the Iranians complained, and he said this is shameful. They're appeasing, and it's like, oh my god.
Yeah.
It's like boomer truth comes to Iran.
Yeah, you're literally Neville Chamberlain, Tsar. You're literal Neville Chamberlain. But yeah, sorry, I was going to say something, but maybe because I've already listened to I have listened to this part, so just continue it because I'll probably think of it in the next point.
And what it's interesting because we can go back to the obviously Operation Countenance, the joint Anglo-Soviet invasion of Iran in 1941, and the fact that happened because his grandfather refused to remove the German diplomatic representatives, and so you can see it now. If there's like another invasion or like a color revolution, it's gonna be, oh yeah, yes, we come back to remove the evil Hitler sympathizers again. It's like, what, the Hitler sympathizers in the Islamic Republic? It's like, okay.
No, Hitman, we must, through the streams, we must protect the true Aryan nations.
Indeed.
Repeating the same approach, hoping for a different result, simply is a waste of time.
In that case, what should be done? So you're essentially saying the idea of engagement with the regime in the hope that it will, moderate its behavior or give up its the nuclear ambitions that it denies having is a false premise. Are you then a fan of Donald Trump's maximum pressure campaign because that didn't change their behavior either last time? Or do you think the Americans have got the wrong end of the stick? And do you know what the Americans are planning? You spend a lot of time in Washington.
Good question. Well, if you look at what happened under Donald Trump's first mandate and the maximum pressure campaign, and to what extent it curtailed the regime's abilities in some way by restricting them to have access to more funding or what have you, was certainly effective. And we see through various statistics of how much of an impact it had. So much as, just to give you one line item example, the level of executions in Iran was more than half the amount between his predecessor Obama and his successor Biden. And that was as a direct result of that maximum pressure campaign. During his second mandate, of course, he's resorting back to maximum pressure, mainly because they know it has been effective, and mainly because they know that as a result of Biden's appeasement tactics, which released more than $100 billion worth of revenue that Iran should not have had in the first place had the oil sanctions been implemented, how that played into the scenario of strengthening their proxies. And I don't think that October 7th was a coincidence. I mean, it was a result of the regime being emboldened, and in fact, it became even more viral and aggressive.
Yeah, as you can see, yes, the Iranian regime did October 7th. And it's like,
Yeah.
come on. No, listen, that Hamas did it, but no, he's got the tie all together, hasn't he?
Well, yeah, and not to go on the October 7th stuff, but there's a lot of sussy things on the Israeli side. But yeah, the thing though is, and this is what's kind of, if he was, let's just say hypothetically, he was successful, like next week, the regime collapses, the current Ayatollah dies, the regime collapses, and he sweeps into government and what have you, and there's the president, prime minister, or Shah, or whatever. He is like the the ruler, and his people come in and they are governing. All of the spheres of influence and the current structure that Iran has in Iraq, in parts of Lebanon, and well, not Syria now, but you get what I mean. Outside of Iran's boundaries, the spheres of influence would also be on him, and would also become under his and his regime's responsibility. So it is kind of like odd. He's just he's like he's all complaining about the spheres of influence. Bearing in mind, looking at the spheres of influence in the Middle East today, where it's been ever encroaching, and Iran has lost Syria to the West. A Western backed jihadi group has seized power. So I don't really understand what his point is in all this.
Well, again, he's just trying to tie it all together, isn't he? Because he wants this grand sort of Trump BBB coalition to bring him into power ultimately.
Yeah, I think that's sort of what he's angling for.
And just another comment from Shrived Goji. Lastly, I'll stop bothering you. It would seem that Iran, if it is in a siege mindset, would be the slowest to fall to liberalism, yet they say the Persians want this. What's the pathway? Well, again, I think not all Persians want it. I'm just saying I think there's a significant portion of the elite. I'm thinking more the bazaris, the merchant class, but also a significant portion of the population who are just morons, frankly. And and that will be enough, I think, for them to sort of say, "Oh, we have the support of the people." And it's interesting you bring up this idea of a siege mindset because, if you want my opinion, a siege mindset is the Iranian mindset. I mean, they've been invaded and conquered so many times throughout history. I mean, you even see it in the nomenclature. I mean, for example, the Safavids, when they recreated the Iranian state, so under Safavids, the Afsharids, and even the Qajar dynasty before the Pahlavis came in, the formal name for Iran was called the Guarded Domains of Iran. It's literally, this is our country, and we're going to, these are our, we're going to protect and defend the frontiers of our nation against these civilizational threats. And that's very much the Iranian mission statement.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that Iran could hope for was a great man who could set the nation on a new course, a new history. I mean, this guy obviously isn't it. I mean, I know some critics might say, well, it's easier for us to say, the Crown Prince is trying to figure out an alliance to get his country, and I get that. You have to make deals with people who you normally wouldn't do. And he's an exile monarch, and he wants to come back and all that. But I would say though, the only way that he could do this and be fair and truthful to his people, and and from a king of kings perspective, is it kind of is his own journey to make. No one else can really make it for him, because even if they did, he will just be seen as the puppet of America, the puppet of Israel, the puppet of whoever. If he was really, this is he needs to be building those connections and those networks within Iran. He needs to be fostering that rival elite, that rival network. This isn't a sort of, this isn't like um I would I would have more respect for him if he was saying, this is my fight. I have to do it myself on my own, on my own with my family's name, and do it like that. And but he's now he's of the view of, well, I'm going to get everyone involved, and we're going to wear the Iranian government down, and possibly in a war which would kill hundreds of thousands of his own people. So yeah,
Well, in fairness, later he does comment and he says his preference is for basically a color revolution and not a full-out invasion. And he actually says that he thinks an invasion isn't necessary because there are plenty of Iranian people that would support a quote-unquote democratic transition. So that's actually a sentiment I've seen expressed by some people in the West who do support regime change in Iran as an argument, saying, oh, we wouldn't need to invade, just do a color revolution, basically.
Yeah, the thing there is, you'd have to have the regime would have to become very, very weak domestically for that to happen.
Yeah, certainly. I think, and I think one catalyst again is potentially the death of the Ayatollah, but we'll have to see.
Not to mention the repression at home since the Mahsa Amini revolution.
Are you saying that October 7th was directed from Tehran?
Well, the celebration hours after the Hamas attack could not have been not staged or planned from before and anticipating that. Not to mention the fact that the Hamas leadership officially thanked the Islamic government for helping them in that attack. These are evident by all the reports that we all read in the media. So it's not like it's a confidential. No, it's out there in the open.
I mean, perhaps the Sunni extremists want to make the Shiite extremists look bad. Have you not considered that at all?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I also, I think there was a lot of, I mean, the fact that Iran was, their main focus, let's be honest, at that time of October 7th was in Syria. It was in Syria, was keeping Assad in power, and also Lebanon maintaining Hezbollah's power, and in Iraq. I mean, his basis is, well, they were celebrating, in the street. There were the mullahs were celebrating the events of October 7th. It's like, yeah, well, I mean, we've had people in this country, celebrated the 9/11. You had the ethnic foreigners celebrating 9/11 in this country, and also parts around the Middle East. That doesn't really account for, well, direct cause. It's just them jumping on the bandwagon.
No, exactly.
But anyway, that's one singular issue. It's the collective approach. Well, getting back to the issue of maximum pressure and why it's important. Yes, maximum pressure is, of course, important, but it's not sufficient. We've been asking the world to understand that the solution is ultimately regime change in Iran and not behavior change. But in order for regime change to occur, you have to have another component parallel to the maximum pressure, and that is maximum support. And what we've been talking to the Americans, to the Europeans, is the importance of, if you really want to avoid military escalation and conflict, where diplomacy has failed, let's not jump directly from failed diplomacy to contemplating conflict and war. There's a third option, and the best option are the Iranian people. And unlike other scenarios of regime change, we were poorly implemented and executed. Example, Iraq and the fall of Saddam Hussein and the Baathification. The change of regime in Iran scenario has nothing to do with what the West in particular, and America specifically, has experienced since 9/11 in Afghanistan and Iraq. Because the minute you invoke the concept, they say, oh my God, will that mean we have to commit boots on the ground? And American taxpayers say we have to fund yet another campaign. And we have an answer to that. We said the scenario of change in Iran does not have to implicate any foreign forces or any kind of occupation or military invasion, because our army on the ground, our boots on the ground, are the Iranian people in the first place, except for they're fighting the fight totally unsupported by the Western free world.
You're talking about a revolution in Iran.
Well, it is a revolutionary, or at least, to say the very least, a pre-revolutionary fervor. It's escalating every day. All the chants you hear on the streets, all the protests, all the demonstrations that specifically call for an end to this regime, death to the dictator, death to the Islamic Republic, in plain view. I mean, if you follow, especially the last few days on the anniversary, the 46th anniversary of the revolution, you hear that all over. And it's not just isolated to one pocket of resistance here and there. What I'm trying to say is back to the question of, is there a historical opportunity for change to happen? We believe yes. But I think that the failure of Western policymakers to catch up to where Iran is now, and I think behind the curve could impede our success in finding a resolution to the ultimate problem. So what I'm saying is that this maximum pressure campaign should involve governments that now recognize that our best way to avoid escalation of conflict and giving that process a chance before it becomes inevitable, because nobody wants to have conflict. First of all, us Iranians, but we can offer an alternative to that. And the alternative is maximum support. So pressure from within combined with external pressure would be then sufficient to force the regime to paralysis and collapse.
Actually, this is a good opportunity to ask a question I wanted to ask, which is that, do you ever reflect on the kind of irony that you're calling for a revolution, you're calling for the same thing that happened to your father? And has what happened in 1979, are there lessons there for this moment? Is there a kind of parallel between, you might take this, I don't want to offend you, but I mean, is there in a weird way a parallel between your father and Ayatollah Khamenei today? Have they found themselves in similar situations? Has the regime made the same mistakes that the monarchy made?
Well, okay, no, it's fair question, but in fact, let's dip right into it. Look, when the revolution in Iran happened, we didn't have the experience of solidarity in Poland or the end of apartheid and the ANC and Nelson Mandela, and scenarios of change that included the level of support that Western free world gave to dissidents and people to feel empowered so they could then overcome the challenges of putting an end to the Soviet Union, or for that matter, the racist apartheid regime in South Africa. That experience was not.
Yes, you heard it here. He's comparing the Islamic Republic to apartheid South Africa.
Yeah, sorry, Hitman.
No, sorry. No, I was just saying that he's just compared. Sorry, you were AFK, but he's just compared the Islamic Republic to apartheid South Africa.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember that bit. Yeah, the apartheid bit. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hitting off all the nodes of the post-war good guys winning against the against the villains of history, quote unquote villains of history. I mean, what's quite funny though is, with all these arguments, with that sort of argument is, of course, you look at his supporters will frequently share footages from Iran in 1970, and it looks fairly decent. The people are walking around, and it's usually like very selective, like students at like universities and stuff, and they're wearing the latest fashion, and you've got like cinemas, and the streets are clean, and everything looks quite tidy. And then they like to say, and then look at Iran today, and everyone's all the women are covered in full headdress, and you have poor quality infrastructure. And these are the Iranians the monarchists that share this are exactly the same as what people on our side who would share when they say, oh, look at South Africa in the 70s or 80s, or Rhodesia in the 60s and 70s, and then look at Zimbabwe today. So it's really funny that the monarchists are like, especially his big defenders, are just I wonder what they would make of that statement.
Well, in fairness, I mean, modern Iran is in a much better state than Zimbabwe or Rhodesia or some areas of South Africa today, and I think that's one thing I'll say in defense of the Islamic Republic.
True, I mean, true, but you get what I mean, like the nostalgia aesthetic. I mean, it is stronger with South Africa and Zimbabwe / Rhodesia for obvious reasons, because it is just, I mean, it looks better. It is, I mean, let's be honest, it is better. It is better in every single way, but yeah.
No, I do see people love their nostalgia.
Well, and the thing there is, the Crown Prince and Pahlavi, he does, present himself, and he encourages, his supporters, particularly the ones that turn out in protests in the UK, for Tommy Robinson and co. Because you see the old monarchy flag of Iran whenever there's like some demo. They are on the the nostalgia trip when it comes to Iran and everything, and he does play into that. So he has to sort of own it to a lesser extent.
Certainly.
Not there. So if today I'm telling you that part of our strategy is to use the experiences achieved successfully, for instance, we're talking about the transition phase. What do we do with the remnants of the regime? The truth and reconciliation path, transitional justice. These are things that at the time were non-existent. And the most important argument that I would like to propose, which is the difference between 1979 and 2025, is the fact that back then, nobody had an understanding of the alternative, because the basic call was the Shah has to leave no matter what. Then we'll see what happens. Well, guess what? Khomeini happened. Nobody had a clue what he was going to do. And by the time everybody figured out, it was too late. The difference is that this time we're not only saying that this regime has to go, because everybody knows it has to go, including former reformists who now are on the converging path with us, understanding that that's the only way to our salvation. But it's a clear path to the alternative with clear propositions so that people this time don't have to guess. They will know what's been proposed. And for that instance, what I'm proposing as the transition phase is not only the role of the interim government that has to obviously manage the country's affairs in the meantime, but also how do we elect the first constitutional assembly where the debate over what the future should be, the constitution, the final form, is a project that is proposed to the nation, and then Iranian citizens, with a clear idea of all the alternatives plausible and possible, will get to choose finally what it is that they want in their majority. In other words, this is, at the end of the day, the determining factor are the people. It's not going to be some...
Yes, the Iranian people are going to be given 3 different flavors of bland liberal democracy, and they're going to love it.
I mean, let's just say hypothetically, Hitman, there is a revolution, and there you have like with the previous revolution, you have many different factions. You have your nationalists, maybe even some lingering socialists and liberals and everything. And has there ever really, because I see, a trend whenever there's a revolution, modern times, early modern times, wherever you have like or more recent style revolutions where you have your liberals and your liberal democratic minded people, they always get shafted unless they have outside support, outside help in some few. But there's this assumption that, well, we'll just talk it through, it'll be democratic, the people are going to have a say, and yet you got maybe some socialists or communists in one circles, or the militarist nationalist types in the other circles. I mean, like in the previous revolution, a lot of it, particularly those around Ayatollah Khomeini in exile in France, were liberals. And they just got totally shafted by the mullahs when they arrived, because they genuinely believed that there would be like this great national debate over who gets to govern the country. And it's like, we are the most organized. We determine who governs. Basically, get out of my way.
No, exactly.
concocted strategy of people saying, because what happened. I mean, for the sake of history, I think a lot of our listeners may not have even been born at the time this happened. Those of us who are old enough to remember, let's not forget one thing. Part of what led to the success of Khomeini was the fact that, unlike Khamenei, who's willing to mercilessly kill hundreds of thousands of Iranian citizens if he had to, let's not forget that my father refused when he was pressured, or at least questions, of where do you stand? Are you going to hold the fort? And he said, after 37 years of reign, how could I possibly have my hands soiled with the blood of the people? That's not justification to retain the throne. And he voluntarily left the country, which led...
By the way, this is a complete lie by omission from him. It's just to be clear, because the Pahlavi regime of Mohammad Reza, he was backed up by a secret police called the Sevak, and the Sevak brutally tortured and murdered many dissidents and opponents of that regime. And ultimately, the reason it fell is because with increasing pressure from the late 70s, eventually the Shah decided to relax some of the repression, and then all that led was even more pressure for him to go. And then when he tried to rely on the army, the army wouldn't back him, and so he had to go. So no, he would have absolutely have killed many more people if he could have gotten away with it. He just couldn't get away with it, and that's why he fled.
Yeah, and there were confrontations with the army, and it was very short ones because soon after you had that famous bit of him. He flew him and his family and his entourage off to Cairo, and exactly the same time, the Ayatollah Khomeini and his entourage flew back from exile. So it was quite a symbolic. In many ways, if we talk about regime change, that is quite a symbolic one. One plane takes off, another one lands with a new, with effectively. Ayatollah Khomeini was effectively it was a theocratic regime, but he was like the new Shah in many ways in his style.
No, exactly. Right, let's carry on.
President Carter and his counterparts in Europe in the summit in the Guadeloupe 6 months before or 3 months before, to say now that the Shah is not willing to stand, we have no choice but to back Khomeini and the revolution. Led by the Carter administration, with this infamous Green Belt theory that somehow a religious wall would be created to contain communism from spreading into the area. That was the theory back then. And oddly enough, when that backfired, then Saddam Hussein became the next shield to contain the regime from exporting its ideology, which led to the Iran-Iraq war. And following that, as a result of that, Saddam Hussein became a problem, which led to the first conflict in the Middle East during Desert Storm and Desert Shield, and later on during the Bush Bush son administration, which was the whole shock and awe campaign and post 9/11 change of regime in Iraq and so on and so forth. I'm just as a reminder, I'm saying that anecdotally, just to understand what has happened in the last 40 years. So none of what we're proposing has any similarities to past experiences.
You've just said you think Western policymakers don't quite grasp this. They're behind the curve. You seem to include the Trump administration on that because you said maximum pressure is one thing, but there's got to be this other component that isn't there. As we're speaking to you, and I say that because this podcast may go out afterwards, but as we're speaking, you're on your way to the Munich Security Conference. Before we get into who you're going to meet and what you're going to say to them, you were disinvited. And then you were re-invited, and it's been a little bit of a scandal. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Why were you originally told you could not attend? What was going on there?
Clearly, there have been some pressure elements at play, but ultimately, the point really is to address the fact that if there's any hesitation or reservation from fear of reprisal, that's really sort of bowing to the blackmail game of hostage-taking by the regime or this and that. A few days ago when I was in Paris, one of the French senators that I met was saying, we are becoming hostages to our hostages. And, just caving into that means pretty much giving carte blanche to the regime to anytime they feel pressure to use the blackmail card and force governments to sort of back off from that pressure. This is pretty much a blackmail strategy. And the question that millions of Iranians are asking themselves, never mind me, I'm just a messenger. But by silencing me, you're silencing the voice of millions of people who are the first victims of this regime. And in a way, when they associate that kind of caving in by Western diplomats in the name of trying to prevent some supposedly bad scenarios, you could understand that people get enraged.
Was there
we are thrown under the bus yet again.
Was there a specific scenario? Was there a specific threat you think, that led to the German government disinviting you, or is it a general sense of let's not upset
I cannot
Tehran?
speculate, but clearly there is something out there that caused this.
Okay, if there's one AI site builder you need to meet, it's this dope
Right.
tech from Wix.
Reaction. But the point is, we move on. I'm happy that I'm going to be able to go to Munich. Not just for that, there are other aspects of meetings with Iranian opposition groups to coordinate their efforts. I'm meeting the victims of the Iranian repression, including young men and women who were shot in the eye and things like that. And of course, meeting with media and what have you. But cutting back to the question you asked me right before you asked this question about the Trump administration, to the extent that I know, because of my meeting or my team's conversation with members of the Trump administration's transition team and personal meetings I've had before with people like Marco Rubio, who I think is, ever since the revolution in Iran, probably the first Secretary of State that really understand the issue and where Iranian stands and what are the dynamics of the kind of change we're proposing, as well as, of course, his national security advisor, that Mr. Walsh, that I also met in the last few weeks. They seem to be certainly understanding of at least the direction that we're saying, and understanding that while maximum pressure has in fact paid some dividends, but they also understand that if we expect to ultimately find a resolution, you have to at some point think beyond the status quo. In that sense, I think the Americans are more ahead of the European counterpart of being more in tune with the immediate situation. And I think what's lagging behind, just to address that, is that there has to be a pivot and a reconsideration of previous strategies or policies that now has to be more in tune with what it is that I hope they will realize is perhaps one way to ultimately remedy the problem, which goes back to maximum support parallel to maximum pressure. If indeed the idea is to say, we know the Iranian people are not the regime, and I'm glad that many politicians are beginning to highlight that more and more. I believe that a direct talk to the Iranian nation by a foreign official is critical. In fact, I remember suggesting this to Bibi Netanyahu when I saw him in Israel. I said, talk to the Iranian people directly. Here's the mic. They listen to you. Talk to them. And you can imagine how important it is if tomorrow.
Yeah, and you could just see how repulsive this man is. Yes, I'm going to get this foreign leader who is in a hostile, warlike situation with my country to urge the people to rise up against their government. I mean, what an absolute treason snake.
Maybe someone should send him a copy of Machiavelli's The Prince, because my God, he has no business of governing if this is how he plans to do it. I mean, this is ridiculous.
No, as I said, I mean, he's happy just being the little puppet Shah while he sells out the country.
I mean, he's kind of Farage coded, Iranian Farage coded at this stage.
God. Oh no. Oh dear, oh dear. Yeah, was it Nijal Faraj? Sounds quite Iranian, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, he's
tomorrow the British Prime Minister or the German Chancellor, should they choose to do that, the impact it has. Because when you're fighting a cause of liberation, and if you want to be in tune with what you profess as being your value system of liberty and human rights and what have you, it's a legitimate question that Iranian people say, are you just saying this because you want to just dismiss it, or do you actually mean it? And if so, what are you going to do about it?
Can I ask you what the specific policy proposals you would put forward then are? Because maximum pressure, I think, is fairly easy to understand. It means very serious sanctions, and it means tightening the sanctions that were always there as well, right?
And additional sanctions.
And additional sanctions.
For instance, the listing of the IRGC on the list of terrorist organization, which the legislating part of Europe, most of them tend to agree, but it's a matter of governments now to actually adopt that and make that the policy, which is very important. Why? And I tell you that one of the factors that is important is because it also plays to the scenario of maximum defections. The more you target the regime's element of repression and at home and terror abroad, and the IRGC has a major role to play in that, you send two messages. Number one, that the regime cannot count on that being anymore an option for them. But it also tells the people, particularly those who are part of that entity, that we are condemned down the path of sinking with the ship, and maybe we should consider now an exit strategy, which, by the way, we are offering them.
The counter argument to that is that the IRGC is an enormous organization now, that if there is going to be regime change in Iran, then elements of the IRGC are probably going to have to be involved in that,
yes,
or on board,
of course.
And therefore engagement makes more sense than declaring not only kind of generals at the top as terrorists, but like hundreds of thousands of, I don't know, 17-year-olds who've done their national service in the IRGC as terrorists. You don't buy that argument.
Why? I am really impressed with what we just said, because you are one of the few journalists who makes that distinction, by the way. And I would like to thank you for that. And I tell you why I'm saying this, because the fact to recognize that, yes, it is an extremely corrupt, mafia-like, militarized state that controls every aspect, including the Iranian economy.
Hitman.
And yes, the top heads.
Yep.
Sorry, just pause it. I was going to pause it there because the journalist actually was like said probably one of the most sensible thing, like what we've been saying throughout this stream, is like, listen, you need to get those generals, you need to get elements of the Revolutionary Guard and people like that on your side. You can't just sit around and label them terrorists and everything. And he goes, yeah, it's good thing you mentioned it. And then he goes back to saying, but these are like criminal cartels. And it's like, I mean, come on, the journalist sort of the journalist is more plugged into reality and realpolitics than you, and he threw you a bone to sort of dogmatic and ridiculous, and even then he sort of went sort of carried on.
No, and I mean, as earlier as you said, we want truth and reconciliation, and they're going to have their Tehran trials where they put the IGRC on trial. So. And actually, because we're getting near to the 2-hour mark, I'm going to jump ahead to the last 10 minutes, and we'll just try and finish up with that as quick as we can.
Sure.
And organize ourselves inside, because you mentioned the term leadership, and it is important. At some point, you have to take it beyond the streets, because you can only do so much in terms of resistance and demonstration. But to orchestrate a campaign, you have to be able to organize at home. The single most specific, there are actually two. One is domestic, one is foreign. The single most indication that I receive is that it is very difficult for us to organize ourselves in a very visible way, especially if it's premature, because we will be immediately cracked down upon. So we have to rely on you guys outside to help us with it at first. So contrary to that particular narrative you alluded to, it is not necessarily the case. In fact, they are telling us we can't do much from inside at first. You need to start it from abroad, but then transition it inside. And we rely on you to be our voice to the outside world. Plus the fact that I think that many elements in the diaspora were not necessarily politicized in the sense of something that is, as we say in Farsi, we have a good expression. It says, you're not in the garden. It looks like you're, that's a Farsi expression. But those who understand and connect with it are extremely valuable, because part of our maximum support campaign is to mobilize the Iranian diaspora in how they can be of help to support our activities at home. So yes, there are always some cynics who perhaps are disillusioned or are frustrated or angry, but I don't think that's really the case. I really think that the potential that the diaspora can play, people who were the first victims of this regime, people who had to escape the country because of all sorts of threats to them, either because they were members in the former system, or they were Jews or Baha'is, or the story. But look at all the success stories of Iranian expats that have been successfully integrated into British society or French society.
Well, how integrated are they if they're just like foreign assets you can activate at a whim as like Manchurian candidates to like help you like overthrow the Iranian regime? I mean, how loyal are they to their new countries then, if that's the case?
Well, yeah, and also this argument that he makes that, well, we can't really do anything within the country too visible because it would just be cracked down upon. Well, I mean, this is where it comes down to it. Either you're serious or not about change. If you are like a revolutionary movement dedicated to throwing out, you're going to have basically a political vanguard of hardened individuals who will have to accept that they, may be killed, maybe tortured, maybe imprisoned, but are willing to go through that. And going back to the revolution, for example, you those within the Ayatollah's remit and the clerics, that did happen to many of them. Many of them who weren't exiled were, as you mentioned, by the Shah's police, were targeted. Many protest organizers who would then become judges and people within the Revolutionary Guard had been imprisoned several times, had been tortured, or been had suffered through this. And he's sort of saying, well, we can do this without the suffering, we'll do this without the hardship, and you just can't. And if you're just going to get the Iranian diaspora out onto the streets in America and Britain and everywhere else in the world, and just fly the flag and attach yourself to local patriot protests, whether you're supporting Tommy Robinson or campaign of against anti-Semitism on some university in America, I mean that's not going to cut it at all. But hey. Hitman, are you there?
Oh, bloody hell! I was muted. I was bloody muted. Right, sorry. Michael has that. Why would Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg would want liberal democracy in Iran? They replaced the woke elite and neocons. Why do tech capitalists want the same foreign policies as the neocons? Well, Zuckerberg, we know why he might be interested, considering his ethnic backgrounds. But Musk, I'm not so sure. Again, I would see with regime change in Iran, this is more of a, again, as he's mentioned, this is more of a Trump and Marco Rubio aspect of the Trump administration, unless Musk, I would say. But hey, I guess Musk could sell more Teslas if they replace the Iranian regime.
Yeah, more Tesla. Tesla factories all over Iran. Yeah, I would say to that, Elon Musk is, he is a liberal. Trump, the MAGA movement has become quite liberal. I mean, you do have the flavor of American isolationism on that, but it is different than the America First stuff. And I will say that the 2015, 2016 America First is very different to what we have of Trump and his people today. I mean, a lot of those people have become quite annoyed with Trump, and they view particularly his over loyalty to a certain country in the Middle East, and has saddled up with a lot of I would say sort of people, neocon types. I would also say, and this is another thing, I think another Adam Curtis documentary, is a lot of Silicon Valley were very much influenced by Ayn Rand back in the day. And you look at that sort of hyper individualism, and that sort of mentality, you can see why people like Elon Musk and stuff, they're not revolutionaries. It's not like they're fighting against the modern world or revolting against the modern world. And I think that you do have to remember that these people are okay. They have different. There is a different within groups within the elite, but at the same day, they're not going to reject liberal democracy. They still believe in it. They still believe it is a guiding force for good in the world.
No, absolutely.
For American society. And it's a dream for the would-be Iranian entrepreneurs of tomorrow who don't have a prayer chance to have under this corrupt system, and they look at successful models outside, and they say, we should be the next Pierre Omidyar of eBay, we should be the next Dara Khosrowshahi of Uber, and so on and so forth. And they understand that the reason Iranians have been
So why can't we be this, economic zone, right? Well, we've got nothing to be proud of. Other, we've got to just invent all these, apps, bro. Why can't we do that?
Oh yeah, this is. I mean, this is where you have like the dudes like, I'm moving to Dubai. It's I'm moving to Dubai. I'm gonna get my like 50,000 dollar Rolex, and I'm gonna have my Bugatti or whatever. I mean, this is just. I mean, this is like the worst final stage of Thatcherism. Thatcherism, Reagan, economics, liberal economics. This is like the most cancerous stage of it now. It's just like economic zone. We are economic zone, Persia.
It's like your entire national identity is been destroyed, but you can get a pizza by an Albanian on a small motorbike at 3 a.m.
Yeah. I mean, you're sat home in your flat in 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 Tehran or wherever, or Isfahan. You're sat in your flat in Isfahan. You got the wonders and the great of history of Iranian culture and civilization just outside your window. Now I'm gonna go on my my Domino's pizza, the Iranian franchise version. I'm gonna have it's gonna be cooked. It's gonna be baked by an Afghan migrant. It's going to be delivered by a marsh Arab, and that's the Iranian dream. That's the Iranian dream under the Crown Prince here.
That's something that's not even come up, by the way, because I know Iran's had issues with like Afghans like immigrating over the border, and recently they think they deported a load of Pakistanis as well. Imagine if this shit comes in, they're gonna be like, no, the Afghans, the Pakis, and the Arabs, they can all stay. They're just they're Iranian, just as you and me.
Yeah, you see, Iranian is just an idea. I mean, don't you know that Iran was ruled by Mongols? It's just an idea being Iranian.
We've had DEI since Humayun, right?
Yeah, the people from the steppes, the Khwarezmian Empire. It's just they felt Iranian. They just all feel Iranian. You get me?
No, indeed.
successful in countries that offer them that refuge but a chance to grow is the exact opportunity that we wish for them. And they understand that, and they want to rely on that. So it's not a divide, provided, of course, that at the end of the day, we recognize that the ultimate change comes from within. There's no question that the ultimate change comes from within, but we also have to understand that in order for the within to be successful, we cannot prematurely expose them because they would be vulnerable at first. We need to strengthen that. That's why the external component is important, not because I say so, because they say so.
I wanted to finish, kind of come back to you and your personal kind of experience. And forgive me if this is a slightly, what's the word, esoteric kind of question. I mean, just reflecting on the peculiar situation you're in, right? You're a monarch in exile or a crown prince in exile. It's an unusual situation, but there's been, there's numbers of people like you throughout history. It seems to me it's quite seldom that the exiled monarchs get to go back. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, in British history, there's the famous story of Bonnie Prince Charlie, who, had to, like your father, his father was overthrown in the revolution. He fled, he tried to come back. It didn't really work because really he was out of touch with the country, because really the country didn't want the Stuarts back, and so on. And so it became a story that's very romantic, but really didn't.
So is there anything you want to add to that, or?
I know a few of my pals who are very big on destroying Whiggish history. I can hear them screaming a mile off from here. I mean, yeah, I mean, listen, yeah, there was of course the sort of Catholic Protestant divide, but at the end of the day, Bonnie Prince Charles, he was defeated in battle. It was defeated in battle. It was just you know, you could say that he did rely on foreign support as well. I mean, at the end of the day, he didn't turn up. He didn't turn up to the Scottish clans and say, by the way, Scotland's just an idea. It's an economic zone. We're gonna open up Scotland to the Catholic world, and you're gonna have like a French, you're gonna have French farm laborers, and you're gonna have like Spanish fishermen or something like that. It was all within the reasonable confines of um the people in Scotland, and also remember he was there to take the whole of his realm, not just Scotland.
But it's important to remember, AI, is that one of the reasons he got support is that he promised a restoration of an independent Scotland. Scotland's its own sovereign realm with its own autonomy, and reverse the Act of Union, and that's why he had support. So if anything, he was acting in Scotland's interests.
Well, exactly. He was acting in Scotland's interests, and he was restoring the boundaries there. And also, the important thing is he actually used his family lineage, his bloodline, and the divine right to do all this. I mean, which the Crown Prince hasn't, and that's the thing where it comes down to it. He was able to draw such a swathe of support in Scotland, in Ireland, and in parts of England because of the animating features, because of he was able to draw on that sort of claim alone, because that claim is stronger than anything else. Will the Iranian people back the Crown Prince when he's like, I mean, okay, we've already discussed the liberal thing, but when it comes down to it, yes, people say they're liberal, and I don't doubt that there are liberal people in Iran who are sick and tired of the Iranian regime and are cursing them publicly, and there's plenty of footage go around of them being bold enough. But when the chips are on the table, the cards are down, or however you want to describe it, will they support the Crown Prince in his effort? Because he's taking a leadership role. Will they support the Crown Prince, or because you're asking people to basically go up against the regime on some sort of kinetic warfare level, and can he draw that can he elevate people up into that and draw them out? And but from this 52-minute interview, I don't think he can. I think Bonnie Prince Charlie could. I think there are certain monarchs who have led some sort of restoration, have done that, but I don't think he can. He doesn't seem that sort of person.
Well, no, but that's my point. He needs his sort of WEF-approved colour revolution, where he's going to then be installed and foisted upon the people of Iran, and just be their sort of pathetic overlord as the country is entropied away.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Well, we're almost at 2 hours now, so we might as well stop here. I think that's been enough. And yeah, but as you can see, what a thoroughly repulsive individual he is. So
it's very disappointing. I mean, given and the fact of the matter is, he said that so many people, and Trump and people, or there are people in the West who I'm guessing he means certain people on the right are behind the curve. I think he's behind on the curve. He has like these really outdated sort of views of governments. And I know I joked, I said he's kind of like the Farage of this Iranian Farage, but he does emulate those sorts of kind of just daft boomer views at this point.
but he's inculcated the views of the people that he wants to back him, though.
Yeah, he's adapted himself to get that sort of support. the trouble is, it's fine to do that, but once, and I don't doubt there is a good chance that if he color revolution or invasion or what happened, him and his pals would be successful, and he's installed. But he doesn't have the staying power. He just doesn't have the the right to rule, and he really would have to smash the clerics in the country. And I just don't see that happening. I know there are people in chat who might disagree and say, oh, they're weakened and they're weakened. I get that they're weakened, but they're not that weakened, and they could bounce back. And this is the thing: the trouble with revolutions, you always think, oh, will the liberals win it, the communists come in, and suddenly this other organized group come in out from behind. It's not as clear cut. I mean, take Syria, for example. A year ago now, we would probably all assume that Assad was in good standing. It didn't look like that it was gonna collapse, and then suddenly it just did. I mean, partly because I think Iran and Russia pulled out, but these things aren't as clear cut as always.
No, certainly not. No, and right. Is there anything you would like to shield before we get out of here?
No, just my channel, AI Shire Homelander. Just check out channel there, and and then my Twitter as well.
Thank you. And so if you enjoy my content and want to support me, you can become a channel member, get access to streams that are behind the paywall. And also, as I said earlier, starting a new series this Saturday on the history of modern Iran. Episode 1 is looking over the pre-modern Iranian history, so from Cyrus the Great until the At-Kalani Confederation, so 550 BC to 1500 BC. So 1500 AD, I should say. And other than that, I'm doing this show every week as I normally do. And you can also follow me on Twitter if you so wish. So thank you, everybody, for watching, and good night.